Can someone help me out? Am I in room 4?
No, this is room 2, but I will quickly post the link for you for room 4. I've sent the link to the chat. I'm not sure if you were able to join the other room. Good morning. The room chair is still trying to join, and he has asked us to proceed with the first speaker. So over to you, Prof. Gambo.
Thank you very much. Good morning. So let me proceed on to share my presentation. Is the presentation visible?
Yes, Prof, it is visible.
Oh, okay. All right. Good morning once again. My name is Mohammed Mustafa Gambo. I'm with the Policy, Research and Partnerships Unit at Shelter Africa. Shelter Africa is a Pan-African housing finance institution based in Nairobi, Kenya. I will be presenting my paper on the title, The Housing Sector, Opportunities for Youth Employment and Entrepreneurship in Africa, with a case study of what we are doing at the Center of Excellence at Shelter Africa in terms of enhancing youth involvement and employment in the housing and built environment industry in Africa. So moving on to the first slide, this is an overview of the whole discussion, the whole engagement in terms of housing delivery.
I am here, but I am also getting Mohammed Gambo as presenting. Is that correct?
Yes, I am the one presenting.
Okay. We will wait our turn.
Okay. So proceeding on, this slide gives us a kind of an overview of where this housing places itself in terms of the 11 goals of sustainable development. Housing is SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, and also the Agenda 2063 of the African Union Commission in terms of the Africa we want, which housing is a core component of the whole engagement. But one thing that we need to consider is that though housing is SDG 11, but the process of housing delivery cuts across the 17 goals of SDGs. Are you taking of climate change? Are you taking of poverty eradication, women empowerment, innovation and infrastructure? Name it, the whole 17 goals of SDGs, there has to be one way or the other where housing has a role and needs to be considered. So that really gives housing an overarching importance in terms of the social and economic objectives of countries and what needs to be done in terms of giving priority and consideration in housing delivery. So moving on, here, this slide gives us the situation of youth within the context of countries in Africa, more specifically Sub-Saharan Africa. Where do we see ourselves in the next 5, 10, 15, and probably 50 years in terms of youth unemployment? What is their role in terms of enhancing social and economic development? Is it a crisis or not? Of course, we're heading towards a great challenge. As the chart there indicated, that 16% of the world population are considered to be between 15 to 24 years, that age gap. And also the majority of this youth are coming from Sub-Saharan Africa. What does this indicate? There has to be opportunities for them. These youth, they need to be given due consideration in terms of their role in the built environment. Are we really looking at it from that perspective? They're the future. Are we having job opportunities for them in the housing sector? Are our housing policies really tailored in terms of enhancing youth participation in the sector? So these are the questions I really need to ask ourselves going forward. So what is legal framework for the protection of youth? Of course, there's a clear charter in terms of youth in Africa, in terms of is their role in terms of enhancing political, social, cultural, economic transformation of the continent. The majority of African population are considered as youth. There are certain legal frameworks, legal instruments that really talks to this, but the policymakers, the DFIs, the private sector, are they really walking the talk in terms of this legal framework? Here it's talking about youth and the right to affordable housing. Of course, youth needs to be given consideration in terms of the right to affordable housing, in terms of affordability, accessibility, security of tenancy, and also the characteristics of adequate housing. Here, we're not talking of any form of housing. No, we're talking of adequate, qualitative housing. Because you might have a housing regarded as a housing unit, but it's a slum. For instance, from where I'm based in Nairobi, we have Kibra, which is considered to be the largest slum in Africa, hosting millions of people. And the majority of these inhabitants are the youth. They are the city of Nairobi, exploring job opportunities, but then they do not have access to qualitative and adequate housing. So they resort to living in slums. So what does this indicate? Provided you're living in a slum, there's a limitation in terms of the opportunities that you can explore. There's limitation in terms of how we can be able to really take advantage of your skills, your knowledge, and your entrepreneurial capacities. For instance, just with the challenge COVID pandemic, 2020, 2021, we have realized the fact that housing is considered to be at the forefront of the COVID mitigation measures. For instance, how can you be able to implement social distancing in a slum? How can you be able to implement quarantining in a slum? And at the forefront of this discussion is the youth, because they are the majority of those that are occupying these slums. And they have a right to affordable housing. So what are we doing? They are the future of Africa. They are the future of our cities. So that really gives us a food for thought in terms of youth engagement in housing delivery. So what are the challenges in a nutshell in terms of accessibility of youth to adequate housing? First and foremost, lack of financing. That is the key aspect. Our finance models, are they tailored in such a way that they enhance youth participation? Because the majority of these youth are in the informal sector. They do not have a kind of a definite working system. So what do you have for them? And they are the majority of the population. How can we be able to bring them in within the housing finance space? The second challenge is that of high cost of property. Exactly. In most cities across Africa, the cost of property is ever rising. From Nairobi to Lagos in Nigeria to Accra in Ghana, and name it. That is a challenge. So what needs to be done from the cost of the property itself to the cost of construction to leading to the cost of land? All these are at exorbitant rates. So that really excludes youth participation in housing delivery. And the third component here is exclusion of the employees in the informal sector. That's the point I made earlier. In terms of the majority of the youth are in the informal sector, they might have probably the skills or the zeal and the interest to be part and parcel of the housing finance scheme or the housing delivery space. But the challenge is, because they're in the informal space, they cannot be able to participate. So how can we be able to bring them in? Then lastly is the lack of awareness. Awareness is a key challenge. The youth, are they well enlightened in terms of the financing opportunities out there? in terms of accessing finance, the ones available out there, in terms of how they can be able to upskill themselves out there to be able to participate in the industry. All these are challenges that really continues to limit the participation of youth in the housing space in Africa. Then moving on to the case study, Shelter Africa. What are we doing in terms of attending to this challenge of housing delivery, coming from the perspective of research and development, coming from a perspective of capacity development, youth empowerment, and other related aspects? So, in view of that, introduction to Shelter Africa. Shelter Africa is a Pan-African housing finance institution that is a partnership of 44 African governments, also the African Development Bank and African Reinsurance. These are the key shareholders of the institution. So what is the key mandate of Shelter Africa? Is providing solutions to support the delivery of affordable housing, commercial real estate, and urban development in Africa. The activities of the institution cuts across financing, partnerships, and also capacity building, training, and advocacy. So within the activities of Shelter Africa, there is the Shelter Africa Center of Excellence. This Center of Excellence has a clear goal and objective in terms of providing a one-stop shop, one-stop solution for all aspects relating to research and development, advocacy, capacity building, training, and advisory services to support the affordable housing and built environment industry in Africa. So how does the activities of Shelter Africa Center of Excellence aligns with the whole discussion on youth participation? So that's the key mandate of what this discussion will tend to focus. The Center of Excellence mission is all about enhancing impact in terms of achieving customer-centric engagement model and strategic alliances. What we have considered as a fact is that no single institution can be able to attend to the challenge of housing delivery. Shelter Africa as a DFI, you can't do it all alone. We have to partner with other related institutions, the public sector, the private sector, the civil society organizations. We all need to come together. More importantly, we're in the decade of action. Now we don't have anything like competition. Collaboration, partnerships is the new competition. So how are we partnering with each other? And then, of course, organizational sustainability, because we are aware of the fact that as an institution, we have to be continuously updating ourselves with the relevant skills and capacities. And also, not only that, these capacities, how do we bring in youth? How do we bring in those that are at the majority of the population in Africa in terms of capacitating them to play a role in the built environment space in Africa? So the focal areas of youth engagement within the activities of Shelter Africa Center of Excellence. First, we have the land systems regularization and development. We have, at the Center of Excellence, we have several initiatives and programs which talks to how youth participation can be further enhanced in terms of land systems regularization, because that's a challenge in most African countries in terms of land reforms, in terms of land regularization, in terms of land titling. The youth might be able to have an interest to participate in terms of probably incremental housing construction with their little savings, but how can they be able to play a role in terms of enhancing land regularization? So that's an area of interest to us. So we do provide programs, initiatives on how the youth can be well knowledgeable in terms of what does it entail in going forward for land systems regularization, in terms of the knowledge, in terms of the enlightenment, because that is key. Once you're enlightened, you know what it takes in terms of enhancing land reforms or the enhancing land titling across Africa. For as a youth, that places you at a better position to have an active voice going forward. Then financial systems development. The Center of Excellence provides financial literacy initiatives, because what we've realized the fact is that the opportunities are there, which of course needs to be further enhanced going forward. But even those opportunities that are available in the market are not well kind of disseminated to the youth in Africa. In terms of what we are doing as a DFI to carry youth along, there are several sort of initiatives from the African Development Bank, from Shelter Africa, and other institutions. But what needs to be done is literacy and also capacity development programs to carry along those in the unbanked and informal sector, where the majority of them are youth. So we do organize several initiatives to kind of carry them along on understanding the nitty-gritty issues in terms of financial system development. Then affordable housing delivery itself. That's the core mandate of housing delivery, because you might have the financing, you might have the awareness, but how many units are we putting it out there? And how are youth kind of being part and parcel of the housing delivery systems? So over time, we have organized programs on how youth can be well capacitated, how they can be well aware in terms of building technologies, innovative strategies in housing delivery, and how their skills and their knowledge can be well enhanced, because it's all about skills. If you don't have the skills, the knowledge, and the understanding of these innovative strategies of housing delivery, then as a youth, you can't be able to play a role. For instance, I'm talking of PPPs. How can youth play a role in terms of capacitating themselves to understand the aspects of housing delivery through partnerships? We're talking of 3D housing construction. We have our youth out there, both from the formal housing delivery systems and also the informal. Also, we have youth as engineers. We have youth as clerks, as supervisors. But do they have the requisite knowledge and capacities in terms of this innovation in the industry? This is the area of interest to us at the Shelter Africa Center of Excellence. Then over time, also urban development and slums renewal, this is an area of interest to us in terms of youth involvement in urban development and slums renewal. And then the other component there indicated in this slide is recent milestones of the COE in terms of youth participation, enhancing youth participation in the built environment. We organized the PPP Masterclass way back in 2019 in Nairobi, where we invited practitioners from the public sector, private sector, to put them through in terms of PPP housing delivery, and also focusing on the Big Four agenda in Kenya, which housing is a key component of that initiative. And the majority of this, a core component of these participants in this masterclass were youth. So we put them through in terms of understanding the PPP as a housing delivery model and how they can be capacitated going forward in terms of playing an active role. Then secondly, at the Center of Excellence, we developed a calculator or a tool for understanding housing affordability, because that's the question. For as a youth, probably of 25 years old, you want to start working towards owning a home, and you do have a job, probably, might be in the formal sector, informal sector, but what is affordable to you as a youth based in Kampala, earning a certain, probably but a monthly earning a certain amount of Ugandan shillings, what that will enable you to start saving towards earning a home. What is affordable to you? That's the question that all practitioners in the industry have been asking. What is affordable to a youth in Kampala might not be the same affordability context to a youth in Lomé in Togo, or a youth in Johannesburg in South Africa. Because the socioeconomic dynamics are different, the earning capacity is different, the mortgage penetration is different, the financial sector space is different along countries. So the question, the argument over the time is that when a household or as an individual, you're spending more than 30% of your earning as in rental or servicing your mortgage, then that housing unit or that you're servicing or building isn't affordable. But that is considered generalized term. that you might be able to spend less than 30% as a youth in terms of rental or in terms of servicing your mortgage. But what you are spending in terms of taking yourself from that housing unit to where the economic opportunities are, probably the central business district, you might be even just spending more, much more, which ends up not being affordable. So this tool that we developed gives us a kind of a holistic understanding of housing affordability, both from the demand and supply side. Even if it's affordable to a youth in a certain city across Africa, but is it feasible for a developer to deliver that unit at that price? So that gives it a kind of a balance, looking at it from the demand and supply side. So there's the affordability calculator. This is a tool which is publicly available. I will also share the link of the calculator in the chat box so that we can access this tool and also use it as a tool, as a key guideline in terms of housing affordability going forward. And also Shelter Africa organized the internship program, which is the internship program held last in 2021, where we provided an opportunity for youth across Africa. In fact, it was we invited through competitive application process. We had 8 interns across 11 countries from Africa, where they interned for 7 months at Shelter Africa. And the whole of these interns were youth. We put them through in terms of housing finance, research and development, legal procedures, and housing delivery to really capacitate them and kind of provide them with the requisite skills and knowledge that enable them going forward, not only to serve Shelter Africa, but also serve the housing finance space in Africa. And also, as a Center of Excellence, we have participated in initiatives, various forums. In fact, as I'm talking to you now, I'm joining this symposium from Katowice, Poland, where I'm attending the World Urban Forum. So we'll be participating in various sessions talking about youth empowerment, youth enhancement, youth involvement in the housing space, and also other topical issues in the housing finance industry, not only covering Africa, but the global industry in terms of housing. So as I conclude, what are the recommendations? The recommendations are clear. We have to walk the talk. We don't have the time. We're already behind time. We are in the decade of action. It's not a matter of one single institution doing it all. We have to come together, leverage on each other's skills and capabilities. It's not only the responsibility of the government or the private sector or the research institutions. No, all partners have to come together. We have to talk to each other, because one of the challenges we're having in Africa in terms of housing delivery and also infrastructure space is that of we don't talk to each other. So we go on probably to do initiatives that might be reinventing the wheel. So by partnering, by coming together, more specifically relating to youth involvement in the housing space, that will go a long way in providing hands-on practical solutions. We have to be practical. We have to be practical because it's a ticking time bomb. As I earlier indicated, the majority of the population in Africa are youth. So what are we doing for them in terms of given them adequate access to housing opportunities, adequate access to employment opportunities in the housing space? If we don't walk the talk, then it will be a challenge. But if we leverage on this and the opportunity of youth in Africa, considering their zeal and their interest to play a role, then that will be a catalyst for enhancing economic transformation in Africa. So the conclusion is well aligned to the recommendations in terms of partnering, collaboration, walking the talk, and also continuously engaging our youth from all angles in the housing space. Because once they play a role, once they feel that they are given due consideration in the housing space, from the housing finance to the land reform sector, to the housing development aspect, to slums renewal, let them have a voice. Let them participate from inception to completion. That will be the future for enhancing housing delivery in Africa. With this, I would like to say thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you, colleagues. My apologies, I came in late on this. I was having trouble coming through, but finally my PA came to the rescue. So thank you so much, Mohammed, for your insightful presentation. Thank you so much for the depth in terms of what you have brought us forward in terms of possible solutions for housing finance. Your intervention around the issue of collaborative work, but also the engagement of youth in the process, but not just superficial engagement. I think what you were emphasizing is much more deeper than what we are used to, where youth and those who are on the margins in our society come in as an addition so that we can look like we're doing something. What you're saying is basically that they should be, from the onset, participants in the development and the engagement of, in the development and co-creation of solutions from the onset. And because we are developing programs and solutions for them and their future, that they should be part and parcel. I don't want to take a lot of time analyzing, but I think, colleagues, we have a lineup of guests who will be sharing with us deeper insights. The next speaker, I will take questions at the end, if you don't mind. The next speaker would be Brendan Boyce. And Brendan, I would like you to just briefly introduce yourself and in terms of what who the organization that you're representing, and then take us through your presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. The name is Brendan Boyce, and I bring you warm greetings from the University of Fort Hare in a chilly Alice. Of course, coming back to UKZN is home, where I did my formative education and also worked as an employee in different portfolios within the university, quite diverse portfolios, from fundraising in the UKZN Foundation, also in the marketing or advancement section of the university. And now my role as a late academic and probably activist towards land rights. This also is echoes of my early professional life, where I served in the Commission on the Restitution of Land Rights in various capacities, initially as a researcher, then as a project manager, and then later as a deputy director. And I also have interests in terms of housing professionalization, where I served in the National Department of Human Settlements as a director for professionalization. Currently, I teach at the University of Fort Hare within the Faculty of Social Science and Humanities within the Human Settlements program. I'm so privileged to be able to be given this opportunity to be able to present to you some preliminary findings on a land restitution and housing project which is located in Durban, and with which I've had a long association with both professionally and personally, and now through my research. So I'll dive into the presentation shortly. It's fine, it's fine.
Go ahead, Brandon, you can share.
Okay, we're just trying to project it.
Okay, all right. Colleagues, in the meantime, while we're still getting the presentation, just think of the key areas that Mohammed spoke about with regards to the solutions for housing finance, particularly the key issues related to how do we, in fact, what mechanisms do we need to achieve to make sure that we transform both the socioeconomic challenges that young people are facing, but I think all peoples who are challenged with housing access, but also what experiences, how can we change this around, particularly for poorer communities in utilizing formal and informal housing finance instruments? What do we need to be thinking about in our respective places of influence, wherever we are? And I think the key idea there was that these sessions are assisting us to think of ways in which we can bring solutions to these problems in a very, very informative way, using different angles based on where we are located in the world. I can see Brendan's presentation is up. Are you ready, Brendan?
All good to go, Prof. Thank you so much.
Go right ahead. Thank you.
Colleagues, thank you for, again, accepting my presentation to be shared and discussed. The title is Hands on the City, and I think it speaks to a number of themes for this conference. The one is for us to interrogate colonial narratives and the colonial experience as subaltern groups, or people that have been the subject of oppressive regimes. But two, the title also is a throwback to campaigns which emanated in Cape Town, which were entitled Hands Off District 6. And this talks to the history of resistance to efforts to limit Black people's access to the city core. So Hands on the City is really a rallying cry which has resonated within social movements across South Africa. And in this case, we're looking at the lessons from the Zanzibar land restitution and housing process within the eThekwini municipality. So that's just to give you a sense of the history. And then subsequent to that, during our democracy, the District 6 Museum and Foundation also held a conference in the early 2000s, which was entitled Hands on the City, and mobilized a number of formerly forcibly removed communities to engage on a conversation about redeveloping the city core. So in a way, the narrative is clear, the thread is clear, and ties in very well with the themes of social justice, urban land reform, and reconfiguration of our cities in the post-colony. This case is located in KwaZulu-Natal, and I'm going to look at the unique history of the community struggle and talk to the issue of the link between the colonial events and progress to the apartheid era, and try to draw a thread and make an argument for the acceleration of land reform and a more focused effort for us to engage in implementation, so that these projects do not remain paper-based settlements, but they actually become beacons of hope, memorials of our efforts to overcome the legacies of the past. Nonetheless, I won't do this from a romanticized position. This will take into the study will take into account the key informants, namely the community's own views, the views of officials, and the views of other practitioners who have been in the space. Again, I'm going to be arguing that we need to elevate the agenda of restorative justice processes. Many of these processes, while encoded in law, both within the Constitution and within specific pieces of legislation, such as the Restitution of Land Rights Act, we have struggled to make them a reality for our urban communities in particular. And in particular, I'm talking to the agenda of the slow trajectory of what we call urban land reform, and actually interrogating the link between urban land restitution and the housing, the current housing program. As you will begin to appreciate, these have been very tenuous due to the bureaucratic machinations of the state and various internal conflicts at the community level. So the theme of restorative justice is really emphasized as we journey as a collective to the normalization of our cities. And I'm raising the notion or the discourse of normalization within the context of transformation of the city spaces. So in this case, I'm looking at the Zanzibari community's active citizenship as a vehicle to opening space, and as Professor Kalema has already alluded to the opportunity for co-creation within the post-apartheid city environment. So we're going to be looking at these opportunities, or I'm going to be presenting at these opportunities through the lens of the Zanzibari community, where there's a very strong and localized social movements which has been driving efforts at land restoration and social justice at a local level, mobilizing history, mobilizing religion, mobilizing the identity as resources, as resources as they contest the space and reclaim their ancestral lands. Now, the Zanzibari community have a very, very interesting history. But in a nutshell, in the early 90s, various leaders of the community formed a social movement known as the Zanzibari Civic Association, with the primary aim of engaging the state local structures and to use the restitution processes which were available in the new democratic dispensation to reclaim lost land rights during the apartheid era. Now, the land that they're seeking to reclaim is a strategic piece of land located within prime real estate along the area known as the Bluff, which have amazing sea views and are part of a well-established South African suburb. And the Zanzibari community have had a long-standing association with this vacant portion of land, which they call King's Rest, which is the historical name. And this association with the land dates back to the late 1870s, where they accrued beneficial occupational rights, residential rights, and agricultural rights. And through the civic structures, the civic structures were instrumental in facilitating that the community lodged their claim with the former Commission on Land Allocation, which was a statutory body with limited scope and powers, is set up in the dying days of apartheid, and was meant to have some kind of a window-dressed a restoration. But the Commission on Land Allocation was fast replaced in the mid-1990s, specifically 1995, where the democratic states under the leadership of the ANC government of national unity, one of the very first laws that were passed was the Restitution of Land Rights Act, which allowed for the formation of the Commission on the Restitution of Land Rights as one of the 7 commissions that were created under the interim constitution. And this commission is still in existence. And this democratic era-based agency secured a comprehensive land restitution and redevelopment settlement package, which really gave life to the constitutional commitment to redress and restorative justice for past wrongs. And what is interesting about the Zanzibari case is that within the Commission on the Restitution of Land Rights, many commentators have been very frank about the slow pace of land restitution. But in and around the year 2000, the then Minister of Land Reform, Minister Hanekom, who was later succeeded by Minister Didiza, initiated a restitution review, which allowed for a substantial increase in the pace of processing of land claims through what was called the Section 42D out-of-court land settlements. And the Zanzibar community was a beneficiary of these administrative improvements in the implementation process. So around the 2003, the Commission, and after a protracted period of negotiations, the Commission, together with the ZCA, formed a legal entity known as the Zanzibari Development Trust, which would receive and hold the land, the restored land, as well as act as a representative of the community beneficiaries. And this entity, or what we call a land legal entity, would also receive a financial compensation package, which would be used as seed funding to redevelop the land. So since 2003, this program or this project has been wrecked by one would say lax implementation and an inept attitude of the state in addressing the constitutional policy and political agenda around post-apartheid spatial transformation. And there's also been difficulties in linking the urban land reform program to the more mainstream housing process. And we've seen a very tense relationship evolving between the Zanzibari Development Trust, the local state, in this case, eThekwini municipality, as well as the Regional Land Claims Commission. And what we're beginning to see as we do some kind of comparative analysis is that the Zanzibari redevelopment project is following the similar pathway as the District 6 restitution claim, where the claimants have actually been forced to take the Minister of Human Settlements to court, that is to the Land Claims Court, in an effort to secure the implementation of the agreement. So this speaks volumes about the ability, number one, the facilitation of the process, but also number two, the tensions that arise in the implementation. And also number three, the missed or the unmatched expectations that the communities have had, the restitution communities have had for rapid realization of their own economic development. So what I would like us to chat about or would like to present to you is that the Zanzibari community is actually quite interesting in the sense that they were the subject of a historical tussle. And as we look at the map that I've just put up, spotlighting South Africa, and just on the right-hand side, what we call the Mozambique Channel, which is in between South Africa and Madagascar, was really the site of what academics call the Indian Ocean slave trading routes. And we know that on the west coast of Africa, from Senegal down, we had what was called the Atlantic Ocean routes, which are much more spotlighted, and there's a rich vein of academic writings about them. So what my study seeks to surface is that equally important is this whole issue of the Indian Ocean slave routes, where we find that towards the end of the end of the 19th century, we see that this shifting public sentiment in Britain and the rise of the abolitionist movement, which actually facilitates the abolition of slavery. And the paper-based abolition of slavery was actually challenged by other colonial powers, where you find the Portuguese and the French continue to be very active along the coast of Africa, particularly the southern tip of Africa, and they maintain their roots, particularly the French in Madagascar. But the British were under pressure in the metropole and established what was called a Royal Navy squadron. And these were fleets of ships which sought to disrupt these slave trading routes, and they actually limited and liberated a number of slave voyages, particularly the Portuguese and the French, and many of these liberated slaves were then brought to Natal, and we'll talk about that later, and then also the Cape. So what we see is that within the colonial context, the forced movement of Black people, particularly from northern Mozambique, was a very lucrative trade. And incidentally, there's actually a very limited literature about this. And so what the Zanzibari claim allows us to do is to see a thread between resistance or the abolition of the slave trade, progressive efforts of the then colonial power, in this case, the British, and a shift from the British, from the slave trade to the indentured labor system. And this put the Zanzibari community in the crosshairs because the then governor of the port of Natal directed many of these successful liberation or liberating voyages to Durban and to Freetown, and as I've mentioned, some to Cape Town. So during the course of the late 18th century, from 1873 all the way to 1888, around 12 liberating British vessels docked in the port of Natal And those ships carried the forebearers of the Zanzibari land restitution claim, or the Zanzibari community. And they were given refuge initially in the early city limits, was called the barracks. At that time, there were two barracks. The one was magazine barracks, which was set aside for Indian indentured laborers. And then the second barracks that we know of was the Point Barracks, also known as the Bowman Barracks, which is set aside for liberated African slaves and indentured Africans. And the map that shows then shows you in red on the left the sites at King's Rest which the Zanzibaris were allowed to occupy. Of course, back in the day, that site was still very much underdeveloped and not the prime real estate that it is today. And there we have the area I've put up on a map. It's the location of the area which the Zanzibar community was temporarily settled in the 1800s, and is now a valuable piece of real estate, which, as I've mentioned, has been restored in paper to the community, yet remains undeveloped. As you can see, some of the main concerns of the community is that this area will be invaded as the complex process of redevelopment and technical planning takes place. And there's costs to keeping this area clean and secured. Also, I'm just quickly depicting the masjid, which was built immediately after the Zanzibari community was settled on this area in the 1800s. And then portion of the land has been developed to old age housing and flats. So one of the issues that this symposium raises is that we need to grapple and come to terms with the period of conquest. Of course, this is a painful history which has had numerous negative consequences. And we also need to surface that even South Africa was along these slave trading routes, and that these slave trading routes, in terms of magnitude and disruption, have had a devastating impact on indigenous people and actually have contributed to the African diaspora and forced movement. Authors such as Allen have argued that the history of slavery and the slave trade in the Indian Ocean regions remains under-researched and marginal to current global debates around the topic. In addition, there are limited instances of actual reparations, actual redress, and actual restitution. And even the issue of memorialization of slavery has taken a backseat in the post-colony. We have sanitized our cities, and our current memorials still bear homage to the colonial overlords, with limited pushback and limited debate. Of course, we are aware of the impact of the scramble for Africa. We are aware that the conference in Berlin in 1884 created a specific geography of division and actually laid the foundation for the continued subjugation of Africa, albeit within new nationally defined nation states. So our conference really needs to determine the fault lines that would shape and constrain, thank you, Prof, to shape and constrain the actual development trajectory of Africa. So what authors have sought to elevate is that there have been few attempts to explore the structural and other connections between the pre-colonial and post-colonial emancipation labor systems within the colonial plantation world. So just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the slave trade in the Indian Ocean basin, between 1500 to 1800, it's estimated that almost 500,000 Africans were transported by the British, French, Portuguese, and Dutch traders within their establishments in the Indian Ocean. And this is a huge forced a movement of people. And incidentally, quite a large number of these, like the Zanzibar community, were forcibly extracted from northern Mozambique, where the Macau language, which the Zanzibari currently practice, together with Swahili, were the main lingua franca. So I'm just going to quickly skip to this element. So what do we know? We know that in the colonial period, especially after the Union of South Africa, a contradiction developed whereby within Britain, the abolitionist movement was pushing for a more progressive society, but in the colonies, there was a drive to cleanse the city of African occupation, mostly, and this is well documented, mostly under the pretext of disease containment and later slum clearance. And the barracks, which I've just mentioned, became a system of control, making sure that Africans, including liberated slaves and indentured workers, were temporary sojourners within the city limits. So what can we draw from the Zanzibari land claim? The Zanzibaris have mobilized their social, religious, and community identity as the descendants of liberated slaves and used it as a resource to co-create the envisaged project. And they've made some of their demands quite specific. I'm just going to quickly skip to these. So the Zanzibari, together with the local municipality, have actually been seeking to navigate some of the socio-technical issues and to create an integrated housing process, which will house almost 200 of their members on this site. They've gone a long road in terms of securing some of the technical planning. And there you can see some examples. And this plan allows for a mixed income, mixed land use development, which includes housing, which includes a shopping complex, and which also includes a cultural precinct. These are some of the preliminary designs that the community has participated in crafting. So the vision is for a multi-story walk-up complex of medium density, which the community will own. Of course, these projects are not without difficulty. There are internal tensions within the Zanzibari Development Trust, where a group of concern has emerged and has actually written to the Master of the High Court seeking an independent trustee. So this raises the whole issue of project governance, the need for capacity support for the community, and the need for the state structures, including the Land Claims Commission, to assist the community in terms of governance setup, succession planning, and compliance with the Trust Property Control Act. Also, a subject of dispute has been the community register. The land claims settlement made provision for the restoration of the land to 199 beneficiaries, but subsequent to this process, new beneficiaries have emerged and have demanded inclusion into the project. So one of the things that has come out from a policy perspective, we all know that there's been a high level review of land reform, which was done by the former president Motlanthe. And this report has emphasized the need for land reform support and for the creation of specialized entities which will take care of what is called post-settlement support, ensuring that the community is not left alone in the redevelopment stage. So as I close, Prof, what do we know? South Africa has envisaged an ambitious urban spatial transformation agenda, which is founded on the bedrock of the Constitution and which seeks to prioritize redress, equality, access, inclusion, and sustainable development. And obviously, these principles embedded in the Constitution are amplified by the White Paper on Land Reform. They're amplified by the National Development Plan. They're also amplified by the Breaking New Ground framework, together with the Urban Development Framework, as well as the Development Facilitation and the SPLUMA. So authors, there's a developing literature around urban restitution and land reform developments in the urban environment. And Christian Bayers argues that land restitution processes should be seen through the lens of expanding citizenship and empowering what he calls rights communities to ensure quality within the land claims process. Rambali, Boyce, as well as Bayers argue that land restitution generally, but particularly with reference to urban land restitution initiatives, has been hampered by the tenuous integration with other land reform and urban housing programs. So what are some of the recommendations? As I conclude, the democratization project in South Africa is unique in many ways. But one of the key defining features of our constitution is the need for redress and the need for restitution and the need for restorative justice as a key feature of our transition away from more authoritarian forms of government. The land restitution process has provided a vehicle for dispossessed communities, including the Zanzibar community, to assert their rights as citizens and to unlock processes of restorative justice which have righted historical wrongs. The Zanzibar project has allowed the community to mobilize, reinterpret, and reassert their social, religious, as well as their political identity, including the aspirations for economic development. So one of my arguments is that although the land restitution and redevelopment process with the Zanzibaris has been complex and can be viewed as a stalled project, it should be viewed as a continuum, and it should be viewed as a dynamic process where the community has been able to consolidate its solidarity and its cohesion. So although land restitution within the academic literature and within the broad scope of land reform is seen as a marginal project, it is in fact a powerful symbol of our ability to redefine our cities in the post-colony and in the post-apartheid context. I thank you, colleagues, and I welcome your comments on my presentation.
Thank you so much, Brandon, for giving us an informative presentation on a case study of the Zanzibari community around Durban. And I think the historiography of the connections that you're making with regards to the Indian Ocean slave trade, particularly for these communities as they continue to struggle for their rights, will give us a food for thought in making the connections across the Atlantic. And thank you so much also for pointing and raising questions around how do we minimize conflicts within and between communities that are finding themselves in marginal spaces where the promise of post-coloniality perhaps is not materializing as we had hoped for. So thank you so much for those connections that you're making, and your paper raises quite a number of important questions that I think are quite deep. And I think we can debate those and we can engage with colleagues with those. As I've mentioned, we have a number of speakers, and it looks like time is not on our side. Without further ado, I would request colleagues to hold those questions, reflect furthermore, and then when we have time at the end, we can ask questions to all our panelists in terms of what they presented today. Without further ado, I would like to invite the next speaker, Joseph Kamutanje, to give us a presentation and briefly introduce yourself and your topic, and just go right into your presentation. So thank you so much, Brendan, and thank you, colleagues. Go take it on, Joseph.
And if there is any evidence of such nature, what?
Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Let me just put my face on screen for a little bit, so that the guys who are in the room can look at me. I would like to take this opportunity, Prof, to thank you very much. It's going to be very difficult to make a presentation after a very eloquent one by Brendan, but I hope that I can do some bit of justice. So let me start. I know if you can confirm that I can share my screen, because even my intro is also on.
Please go ahead, Prof. You can share your screen.
So if you can just confirm that you can see my screen.
We can see it, Prof. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I try to reflect on the Pan-African city and what I could contribute in terms of the experience that I have had, both in the past and the work that I'm currently doing. And I've been focusing a lot on capacity and building resilience of communities, both in rural and urban areas. So I thought that my paper would talk about resilience and inclusivity. So that's the title of my paper. I think the interesting part is right at the end, where I also talk about the development gears. So I looked at the city as a vehicle, and I was saying, for you to get a vehicle to move, you have to change gears. And so if we want to build resilient cities, if we want to build inclusive cities, what are some of the gears that we need to put in place? So basically that's the direction that I would like to take as far as the paper is concerned. So in terms of background, I'm a student of rural and urban planning. That's been my life throughout. But I think it's also important just to note that I did some work for Ministry of Local Government in Zimbabwe for 15 years, dealing with the issues that this symposium is trying to work out, to understand. So I was right in the middle of things, working with local authorities, but also working with communities to try and crack this issue about housing and how it can contribute towards the growth of the city. So in terms of outline, I'm just going to run through the methodology. I wanted to spend some bit of time on defining some of the characteristics of urban spaces that we should be aspiring for. I want to spend some bit of time on the conceptual framework, and this is going to be really the issues to do with resilience. And then to mention some of what I consider to be the gears for resilient cities. And just to put a disclaimer, right at the start, Prof, to say that these are a few of the many gears that I just thought about. And I know that this August room with all the participants and the skills, I will be able to put in a little bit more, and then we can draw some conclusions. So in terms of methodology, this was really more in terms of my practical understanding of development and planning issues in the housing sector, especially in Zimbabwe. So basically some bit of literature review, not a lot, but I concentrated a lot on my field experiences as a planner, but also as a general development practitioner. And also some of the work that I have done, and I'm very proud to say with the University of KwaZulu-Natal, in terms of looking at urban development and urban resilience. So in terms of the cities that we want, I think I categorize them into 4, and these are general, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. I think the first one is this concept which has gained a lot of traction, which is the smart cities. And there's been various definitions of what could make up a smart city. And at the moment, the discussion is meandering towards green cities, cities that respect climate change, that respect the environment, that respect the creation of green jobs. But when I was in my undergraduate time, I think there was a lot of talk about the city being orderly, being convenient, being safe, and being aesthetic. And I think those are some of the issues that we still grapple with even up to now. And my biggest challenge, and I hope that the panel can help me, the biggest challenge is that the more we become technologically advanced, the more we become modernized, the more the challenges that we face in terms of making sure that those 4 pillars are actually part of the cities that we have. Inclusive cities, in 2020 and 2021, collaborated with Professors Magidimisha and Chipungu to contribute to a book that was being done by UKZN. And I contributed a chapter on inclusivity, but mainly to do with disability. And my argument in that paper was, it's just one of the many things that we have to struggle with. We need cities that are inclusive in all forms and in all senses of that word. Just cities, there's a big concept in terms of social justice. And we already see it in any environment that we are in. Already there's classification between the more affluent parts of the urban space and the more degraded ones. And how does that affect service provision? How does that affect movement within the cities? How does that affect job creation? How does that affect employment? But I think in the past few years, I've really tried to work on resilience as far as urban spaces are concerned. And I'm going to go through the conceptual framework, which I've tried to use. For those in the know, this is a framework that has been used by USAID, not necessarily within urban spaces, but I think it's really important for us to try and see how best we can fit it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in terms of explaining, but what I want to do is to share a little bit about the capacities that define resilience. And there are 3 of them. So the first one is the absorptive capacity. If a city is hit by a tragedy, and I know that Durban, for example, experienced some floods a few months back, the communities and the urban systems and the urban infrastructure, first of all, what they have to do is to absorb whatever has come, whatever hazard has come. The next capacity is the adaptive capacity. How do you live with the situation that you are in? If I drop back to 2019, when COVID started, people didn't know what to do. Governments didn't know what to do. The protocols that were put in place at various levels were really to absorb the pandemic. Okay, and if anyone in this room would have told me that before 2019 you would be moving around wearing a mask then I would have said you deserve to be a prophet of some sort of religion. But now we've adapted. You know, if you are moving in Harare, if you are not putting on a mask, people look at you and they don't understand what kind of a person you are. You know, these are the things that we are doing. I think the most important capacity for me is the transformative capacity. So whilst the first two, the absorptive and the adaptive capacities, could be at an individual, could be at a household level, could be at a community level, the transformative capacity is at the institutional level. So the argument here is what we have to do is we have to empower the institutions to be able to respond to the hazards that affect urban spaces, but to the efforts that communities put into making sure that the urban spaces are habitable. So for me, this really talks now to issues that are much bigger and much broader than just housing provision. In the plenary this morning, there was a lot of debate about housing, you know, the need to provide housing. And my argument, which I didn't want to share until now, is to say housing is just one of the many components. When you think about it, it's right in the middle. So upstream, the activities that need to happen for housing provision to work. And when housing provision has been done, there are also things that need to happen downstream to make sure that the city continues to play its role in terms of facilitating convenient and safe stay for the urban communities. So when I was looking at resilience, I picked out four pillars that I think are really critical. Some of them I've already spoken about them. Some of them were spoken about in the plenary, and I know that Brendan also touched on a few of them. So when you think about it, the first one for me is really affordability. Is the urban space affordable for the people that want to stay in those areas? And when you look historically, this has been a very, very big challenge. If the city is not able to generate employment opportunities, then it becomes very, very difficult for communities to afford the goods and services that are offered by the city. The second pillar for me is accessibility. If you take from a historical point, at least in Zimbabwe, where I came from, and I know that South Africa went through the same challenges with apartheid, issues of accessibility, in terms of just getting into the city, the issues of passes and the other restrictions of that nature. But more and more, whether the services that are being afforded in the city are accessible to the communities that should benefit from them. And then I spoke about inclusivity, to make sure that the city takes in everyone who needs to be in the city. And there are a lot of issues that eventually exclude communities from accessing the city. And I think that my colleagues have already gone into some bit of detail as far as that is concerned. And then the final one is the sustainability. How do we sustain the city? How do we sustain housing provision in the face of all the macro and microeconomic challenges that we are facing? So let me now move on, Prof, to the last part of my paper, which is on some of the gears. And in the main paper, I was very clear to say some of these gears, and in fact, all the gears that I'm going to be talking about, we know them. If various local authorities across Africa have tried to implement them with varying degrees of success. But I think it's important perhaps now to sit back and use this symposium to say, if we are going to go the same route again, what is it that is different that we are going to be doing in terms of promoting some of these gears? So the first one that I really picked out on was local economic development. So I've also been doing some bit of work with the University of Venda, the Institute of Rural Development, just to promote the concept of local economic development. The argument is that, and I know that Prof. Mbanga in his opening remarks this morning was talking about the need to have local solutions. And in my view, the promotion of local economic development is one of those. And I have not tried to define exactly what is involved, because I think that the basket should be as open and welcoming as possible to try and get everything that communities are doing for them to survive. I think the point that is then to be made is that it is in the best interest of local authorities, of central government, to promote local economic development, because that is the only way through which the communities can pay for the services that are provided for them. So I think the issue cannot be overemphasized, that we need to promote interventions that take advantage of the local opportunities that are available in the different urban spaces. The second one, Prof, and this is very close to me because I've just concluded some work in Harare with United Nations Development Program on urban agriculture and how it could actually contribute to growing the resilience of urban spaces. So if you take a historical perspective of Zimbabwe, for example, it's not until the early 90s that people started to talk about urban agriculture. What had happened is that, after the economy, after independence, we went through a period of growth. We started having challenges around 1987, 88. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank came in with structural adjustment programs. The effect of these structural adjustment programs was massive retrenchments. So the people that were retrenched had a choice either to go back to the rural areas or to try to make it in the urban areas. And one way for those who made the choice to stay, one way to be able to afford the city was to make sure that they grew their own food. So when urban agriculture started in Harare, it was really to do with the growing of maize as a staple. But what we have seen now is that it has become a multi-million-dollar industry, because not only the fact that at every homestead that you go to, there's a bit of urban agriculture, but what has also happened is that the whole urban food system is being centered around the capacity of the urban space to produce at least some of the food that it consumes. So I think this is a very important gear that still needs to be understood in terms of its contribution towards growing the local economy. I come from a country where it is argued that the economy is almost 99% informal. So we seem not to have a choice, but to begin to look at the informal sector in a different light. In the past, just as was the case with urban agriculture, the informal sector was actually looked at as a problem child within the city environs. But what we are seeing now is that we need to find ways of promoting the informal sector so that it continues to contribute towards the growth of the city. And I think it's a big challenge because all that we know, all that we have been used to is the formal sector. So, there's not been that appreciation of the role that the informal sector could actually play in terms of supporting urban resilience. Infrastructure development is a huge one. So when I was driving from the airport yesterday, the guy who came to pick me up asked me about infrastructure development in Zimbabwe. And I said, it's still a challenge. The roads that I have traveled so far in Durban, very good. I'm still trying to look for a pothole at least in one of the roads. But this is a big issue. This is a big gear, because without infrastructure, proper infrastructure development, it's going to be very difficult to build the resilience of our urban spaces. So in terms of the road network, the water systems, the sewer reticulation, and I know at the moment we are having serious challenges, both South Africa and Zimbabwe, in terms of electricity and how it distorts the industrialization path that we are trying to move on. So I think this, again, going into the future is going to be really critical in terms of making sure that urban spaces become resilient. So good urban governance is also a very, very critical issue. It's a critical gear because, like I said, it's part of the transformative capacity that all the urban spaces require in order to move forward. So I'm really not going to spend a lot of time, but just to emphasize the point that part of promoting good urban governance is to make sure that the citizen is also involved and actively participates in the decision-making process. And I try to link this with a conducive legislative framework. The argument that I have had ever since I was a practicing planner until now is that at least in the case of Zimbabwe, the challenge that we have is that most of our laws, especially the planning laws, operate on a deemed refusal basis. So what it means is that if a prospective developer comes up with a concept, the onus is on them to prove to the local authority and the local government that that intervention is necessary. And knowing the situation, what some of the government officials will do is simply to sit on the application. And this frustrates a lot of the resilience that we are talking about. So what I've been advocating for is deemed acceptance, where the onus now is on the local authority or on the government system to argue against the necessity of an intervention. And in the countries where this is being used, it has actually speeded up development interventions. It has led to a faster growth of the urban economy. And at the end of the day, the cities become more resilient. I've got two more to go. And I know that Brendan, in some of his remarks, was also touching on this. And I know that the morning session was also dominated by the need to innovate. And one of the areas that has become big in terms of innovation is really the green economy, to make sure that we use technology to the best of our ability and to be able to reduce some of the challenges that our communities are facing. So I think the challenge is on us as academics, as government officials, as the private sector, to continuously be on the lookout for the innovations that are going to help us as far as this is concerned. The final issue that I would like to contribute on, Prof, is access to finance. I know that in the morning session as well, there were a lot of unanswered questions. And just before I started presenting, I was reading a policy statement that has been issued by Minister of Finance in Zimbabwe just a couple of hours ago. And what they have done is to set the lending interest rates at 200%. And I'm just thinking, if you have got a housing development project, why would you go into a bank and just crucify yourself like that? So you know, until we get financing models that allow the city to expand and exploit its full potential, then we are going to have serious challenges. So, Prof, and the panel, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you. The purpose of my paper was just to begin a discussion on how best we can go in terms of rejuvenating the development gears that our cities and the other urban spaces so desperately need. And I want to thank you for the opportunity. Thank you very much, Prof. I rest my case here.
Thank you so much, colleagues, and thank you, Professor, for giving us an opportunity to engage with some of the concepts that you brought forward, particularly the conceptual hardware of justice and inclusivity, and also linking it to local economic development. The examples that you gave around urban agriculture and how we can utilize opportunities there to build resilience urban spaces, and not forgetting also the informality of our communities, or where in our contexts, and the challenges thereof that we're all facing in accessing some of these infrastructure issues that you have highlighted. And also what was really interesting and very insightful about your presentation is what we can look forward to in terms of harnessing the opportunities that technology or technologies can bring us, looking at different financing schemes that we can develop based on our context, but also the green economy and what that affords for us. And I think the link with what Brandon was talking about in terms of specific communities that are still struggling with injustice is the whole issue of developing new corridors
around the Atlantic to see if we can harness on those and never forget the opportunities that that corridor lies. I mean, the Mozambique, Zimbabwe, I would add Swaziland corridor in that blue belt that in this economy in the East. So thank you so much, Prof, for giving us food for thought. Without further ado, I would like to, and colleagues kindly keep those questions in mind for the presenters, but also try to evoke some of the things that they are not discussing and be critical around issues that we need to tease out so that we can move this process forward. Without further ado, I would like to call upon Deborah Leb, Professor Leb, and just request that you give your presentation. You are the Managing Director for Real Estate Project Finance with the United States International Development Finance Corporation, and that I will leave the rest to you to discuss in terms of what brings you to this conference, but also engage with colleagues. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope you can hear me, and I'm sure we'll be able to hear you very well. So please welcome.
Yes, thank you. I can hear you just fine. Thank you so much. It's great to see everybody here. I've done a fair amount of work in a number of countries on the continent over the years, the last 20 years or so, and it has been a challenge. I mean, my role at DFC is to provide loans for housing projects, other real estate, but primarily housing projects, either construction, for rental properties, for mortgage finance, and it has not been easy. So I definitely take on board some of the points that were made by Brendan and Joseph earlier, as far as the land development issues and land titling and land rights, as well as the city challenges with respect to resilience. Those are all at the very top of our agenda. So I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to engage with all of you who are thinking of the future and ways to develop urban environments and hopefully housing, which is what I'm primarily going to talk about this morning. So I'm going to open my PowerPoint. Let's see. And then I think I do share screen, right? Okay. Looking good?
Looking great. Thank you so much.
All right, super. So this is a worldwide challenge. I, until recently, was on the board for Habitat for Humanity in Washington, D.C. And in order to build a handful of houses a year, we're talking 8 or 10 houses a year, as compared to 8 or 10,000 houses a year, which is what would be needed in many countries in Africa. We had to raise money. We had to negotiate with the local land trust, the DC Land Trust, to get rights to affordable land that would be located within the city limits. And there were quite detailed criteria for that. We had to raise normal construction finance from a couple of local banks. We also had to negotiate with a tax credit program, low-income tax credit program, which was a very complicated program to manage. We used volunteer labor. We got grants and donations from corporate sponsors for specific houses or specific activities. It was an extremely complicated process to manage. That aside from everything required to just get the houses built. And then on the other side of it, we also had to manage the home buyers who usually had at least 2, maybe 3 sources of financing themselves. They would perhaps get some down payment subsidy or closing cost subsidy from the city. They might be participating in a federal FHA mortgage insurance program. They probably be working with a standard mortgage lender, and maybe some kind of second or third mortgage from Habitat itself. And we, as developers, were responsible for helping our clients move through that process. It's incredibly time-consuming, incredibly complicated, and it introduces to the housing process, it introduces risk. Risk that you can't deliver your project on time, for delays in cash flow because somebody isn't able to get their subsidy approved and so they can't close even though the house is ready. And if you're relying on the cash flow from those sales to build the next house, which we were, it creates serious problems for managing your business. And if you're talking about building thousands of houses, efficiency within that system and managing these multiple sources of finance is absolutely critical. The problem is developers and builders out there are aware of the complexities in developing low-income housing, and they're just not willing to bother. We're putting a lot of demands discussed by Mr. Kamasanjay just a moment ago. We're putting a lot of demands on today's housing developers. As DFC, we and any other DFI is going to have the same criteria. Not so much the private banks, but most large-scale affordable housing developments today are being funded either by social impact funds, specialized government programs with subsidies, et cetera, specifically targeted to low-income housing, or DFI, international financial institutions. And if you're going to work with any of us, we're expecting you to be developing projects that feature all of these components. They need to be transit-oriented. In order to be affordable, you can't have people paying large sums of money for transportation to and from work, shopping, schools, healthcare, whatever their community needs are. They definitely need to be efficient for energy and water. We want to see sustainable waste treatment and climate resilience that Joseph spoke about just a little while ago. We want to see that these projects are developed with women and children in mind. And that requires, I think, a significant amount of community engagement to find out what actually works, what kind of designs, what kind of locations, what amenities are most useful for small families or women, single women head of households with children. We want the community amenities to be regularly available. So, like I said earlier, we want them to have access to childcare centers, to safe public transportation. We want there to be green space. They need to be well lit, good security features, and access to just general, places of worship, shopping, and healthcare are all extremely important. And oftentimes these large-scale projects are not located in urban centers. They're located in peri-urban or even outside the city boundaries. And those types of services are not readily available, which is one of the challenges. And then, of course, we want them to be affordable. And then the providers have to meet all of our ESG targets. So any of these projects that's utilizing grant funding or DFI funding or impact investment funds is going to be required to comply and monitor. There's an ongoing monitoring requirement for tracking the reality. So in the beginning, a project is developed and we have expectations for certain impact elements to be achieved. But we want to see that that actually happens. So over time, the builder developer is also going to have to keep track of these things. Needless to say, this is a huge challenge for most housing developer builders today. They're not prepared to deal with all of this, and there's cost involved with all of this as well. So the more efficiency that we can build into the ecosystem for these builders, the more likely it is that we're going to encourage them to build more affordable houses and increase the supply, which is ultimately the goal. So some of the barriers that developers face, as I mentioned earlier, there are so many sources of funding that need to be cobbled together in order to get an affordable housing development completed. Generally, for a middle or upper middle project, the developer goes out and buys land, they lease the land, tie it up in whatever way through joint ventures, and it's a straightforward process. They can do it in the urban center because they can afford to pay the price for well-located land. But an affordable developer most of the time cannot do that unless they get some kind of special agreement, like we did in DC with the land trust, where we get low-cost land or no-cost land through an agreement, some kind of public-private partnership. And this can be in Africa, either with one of the main national ministries who tend to own quite a lot of land, or with the individual municipality. Nonetheless, those PPPs are extremely difficult to negotiate, and they need to be structured in a way that works for all of the other financing partners in the package. Again, equity is relatively easy to raise for middle and upper income projects. They tend to generate higher returns. They tend to be a little smaller, and so easier to develop over time. But in the case of affordable housing, what you're generally looking at is working potentially with social impact funds for your large-scale equity investments. And those funds are typically not that familiar with housing projects. So that's a challenge. Mezzanine debt, in my experience, not that available in Africa, definitely more typical in developed countries or more developed upper income countries, and typically available only for companies that are well established. Then you have construction loan. That's your standard construction bridge loan that needs to be negotiated with the bank. Sometimes in Mexico, for example, there is a government agency that provides construction loans specifically for affordable housing. A lot of countries use buyer progress payments. So the buyer signs a contract, and instead of borrowing money from a bank, the developer simply collects progress payments from the buyers during construction. We have real issues with that at DFC. The problems that would occur if the buyer has paid money into the project and the developer doesn't complete it, it definitely just creates all kinds of legal and social concerns for those families who have used their savings, but they don't get a house. Most of the time, that responsibility falls on us. The other problem is affordability. A low-income family generally doesn't have the money to make progress payments at the same time that they're paying rent on their existing house. Government subsidies, definitely, this is more common that you would receive, the buyer would receive a subsidy payment upfront from the government. In the case of Shra in South Africa, that subsidy is funded incrementally during construction. And the same is true in Mexico. Housing subsidies are funded only at a point where the project has been developed to a certain stage. mortgage proceeds in India, the buyer goes and gets their mortgage, and then the mortgage lender disperses that loan during construction. So instead of the developer having to fund construction with a loan, the buyer takes on the burden of funding, of obtaining a mortgage, and they take on the obligation for that mortgage at the same time that, again, they're making a rent payment, and that mortgage funding then is used to fund construction. There are grants that can be obtained. As some of you know, if you're in academia and you've had to apply for grants, you know getting grants is not easy. It's very time consuming and a complex process in and of itself. But some developers do obtain grants for buyer training programs. A number of years ago, I worked with a South African company who set up a separate company to do nothing but facilitate the home buying process and the mortgage process for their buyers, and to train them in things like financial management and other elements related to home ownership or becoming a new renter in their project. Green certification, a lot of times developers aren't familiar with obtaining EDGE or other green building certifications. And so grants could be raised to help them with that process, or also for building amenities like a clinic or a preschool or other community amenities that might be needed for the project. Primary infrastructure is a key concern, as was mentioned earlier. A lot of times this can be an in-kind contribution to the project by the local government and local municipality, but that can be a challenge as well. So if you just look at this list, these are all of the elements of the financing process, the inputs to the project that a developer needs to manage in order to deliver affordable housing at scale. So public-private partnerships are fairly common. I will tell you that I've reviewed many over the years in different countries, and I have yet to fund a single one. The benefits of them are usually the project would get some kind of tax exemption or either VAT or other types of stamp taxes, title transfer fees, things like that. Reduction in import duties is quite often available. The grant of land, which I mentioned earlier, and then possibly this support for utilities to bring in the primary infrastructure. Usually they bring the primary infrastructure up to the boundary of the project, and then the developer funds everything internal to the project. Issues, however, with these P3 agreements is that you usually have to deal with more than one entity. So there may be a national ministry or national agency that is negotiating these P3s, but if the land is located in a different state or municipality that has a different kind of relationship, then different expectations, different politics than the national agency, it may be very difficult to come to some common understanding as to how that land is going to be used, how it would be titled and transferred to the project, and whether it can be mortgaged for the purpose of financing. So, like I said, this conflict between national and local politics, that kind of coordination is really important. And most of the time, the developers get caught in the middle of those negotiations. The land may not be suitable. So you may get free land, and I've seen this, developers are offered free land, but it's not feasible. Either it's not viable for development, it's located so far out of the city center that it requires a complete infrastructure. All primary infrastructure has to be brought out to the project. In many cases, the government doesn't have the money to do that. So the developer is faced with trying to raise funding specifically for developing the primary infrastructure, which is a major risk and very difficult to find money for because of that risk. There are criteria. So any of these PPPs are going to have a full list of criteria for the size of the unit, the type of amenities required, the price, even the material inputs for units. We have seen housing projects where the government requires a certain type of construction, which means that for an affordable developer, they're not going to be able to go out and use more innovative building materials, building inputs, which would help lower the cost. 3D printing, for example, or modular type housing construction might not be allowed. We did see this in Ghana. Until recently, there was resistance in the National Standards Board to bring in anything other than, you know, your traditional concrete or brick construction mechanisms. And all of those things are limiting factors for a developer. You know, corruption is definitely an issue. I had a client recently negotiating a P3 agreement, and they stopped the negotiations because the agency he was negotiating with requested 15 houses to basically be given to members of the ministry in exchange for signing the P3 agreement. The major problem from my perspective is that these P3 agreements are not always professionally developed. They don't meet international standards, and therefore we as a DFI can't work with them, and we can't finance them because they are insufficiently transparent. They haven't been bid, publicly tendered, and they don't make allowances for the type of risks that we would face with respect to treatment of the land or interference with the project by whichever government entity controls it. Oops. Sorry. Sorry, excuse me. Okay, I just got my slides out of order. So the other issue that developers have to face is managing the buyers. Like I said earlier, the buyers have all of these different sources of financing, and at the low income spectrum, they're usually unsophisticated with respect to all of these processes. Each of these applications is different. For the developer, each of those financing sources that he or she needs to obtain have different criteria, different application processes and timelines. And all of these have to be aligned so that they are able to develop the project on schedule, on budget, as efficiently as possible. It's extremely challenging, and it's a major deterrent for developers who are already building in the middle income space that we would like to see move down the spectrum to lower income housing. They basically say it's too much trouble, it's too risky. And the returns, because they are lower income projects, the returns are not at the level that these developers are accustomed to seeing until you get to scale. So if you're able to get to the point where you're building to scale and you have an efficient operation, then you can see pretty good returns for affordable housing. It's getting there, it's climbing that mountain to get there that's the challenge. So I think the slide basically speaks to this. Right now, developers who are trying to work in the affordable space are doing all of this buyer facilitation themselves. It's not necessarily the best way to do this. Arguably, the developers, there's a conflict of interest here. You know, they want these buyers to be ready to purchase the houses. In order to get them ready, get them qualified, and keep the process moving, they need to provide that support. On the other hand, they have self-interest. And so is it necessarily the best way to have developers managing this process? It's not their core competency. So I would like to suggest a few things. First of all, this has been discussed before. At the government level, you really need a one-stop shop. There needs to be, if you have a a government that says we want to support affordable housing over the long term, then you need a consistent program that's budgeted consistently. There, in Chile, for example, in Colombia, not so much Mexico, because the Mexican government just did away with a very important subsidy program. But in Chile and Colombia, you have well-oiled machine, Panama, well-oiled machine for delivering affordable housing. It's because those programs have been stable for years. They carry over from one administration to another. There's good coordination between the national and the state and provincial level governments, and there's funding. There's consistent funding for the programs. So what you need is one entity that the developer can go to and coordinate these P3 arrangements. The public housing programs need consistency, because think about it, a development of 4,000 or 5,000 units takes years before you build a single house. It takes 2 or 3 years to do all the pre-development and land preparation and permitting and titling, everything that you need to do to be ready to build a house. You cannot have a government that's changing midstream its policies or requirements while you're leading up to that initial development. This harmonization of local and national criteria and processes is also extremely important. I think that we should have the lenders that are providing mortgage funds, I think they should be coordinating with the buyers for all of these subsidies, insurance, title transfers. I think that's the right place for all of this to happen. And we should have standardized documentation. All of the documentation should be plain language. That is so often not the case. Buyers need clear documents so that they understand what their obligations are from day one, from the purchase contract for the unit through the mortgage finance, grant, and subsidy financing. There are digital systems out there that you can put on a simple phone. You don't need a smartphone. You can put it on a simple phone that allows a customer to track. There are already payment systems, which a lot of mortgage lenders are doing, but there are also systems that help you track progress, that have checklists on them, that help a buyer go through the process and answer questions and pre-qualify themselves, check themselves through the process. Those could be used to make it more efficient for the buyer and more transparent for the buyer. I think too that developers can partner with nonprofits or other community organizations to help with this buyer communication and community engagement process. This is something that developers historically have not done, but in the affordable space, I think it's extremely important. And those builders and developers that I've worked with in Africa that are successful have very robust community outreach and community engagement programs, either within their agency, within their company, or through negotiations with partnerships with community organizations in the different communities where they're developing properties. The other thing I think we can do in the financial world is come up with aggregators, packagers, if you will. So what I'm thinking is, are there companies out there who would develop a package of grant funding, mezzanine debt, equity, and construction debt that a developer could essentially go, once again, a one-stop shop. They can go with their project, they can present their project with one package that would feed into all of these different sources. So you have this single aggregator that handles the entire process of applying and negotiating for funding from all of these different sources at one time. So it basically serves as a conduit between the developer builder companies and all of these different funding sources. I think there's an opportunity there, and it was an idea that came to me while I was working on this presentation. So I'd be very interested if anybody out there has any thoughts on that subject and whether you think it might be feasible. That's all I have to say today. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing more as the conference continues.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Deborah, for your insightful comments and presentation around ideas for consideration. I think your last slide sums it all for us in terms of what do we look for next. Colleagues, we heard from Deborah, and I think what the take home from Deborah, what she presented today was a very deep analysis of what is possible out there in terms of housing finance from a perspective of a lender, but also for a perspective of a development agency that is responsible for supporting housing developments across the globe. And one question, just to start us off, I know that colleagues have been holding their questions for other presenters. One question to start us off, I mean, you did mention issues around accessibility for different constituencies. And I think the continuum of accessibility is glaring at us. You know, you have, depending on what socioeconomic status one is at, regardless of whatever country one resides, upper middle class, upper class, middle, low income, and then those who are on the marginal, the homeless. How do they access these opportunities for finances? Obviously, there are different schemes that could be developed for colleagues and communities to access if they want to build, but also if they want to build communities. And for me, what also I'm taking from your presentation is the issue of governance, particularly the politics around governance and the corruption issue that you raised, and the lack of transparency in not meeting standards that are international for a lender to support housing developments across the globe. And what is also important, I think, from what you've raised is the issue of community engagement, that process that requires some sort of engaging ethically to ensure that communities are part and parcel of the discussion around where the communities they want to build and the housing projects that they want to develop. So ideas around one-stop shop, policy alignments, and consistency in budgeting from the public sector to support public housing, but also having a lender, whether it's a bank or some sort of another entity for financing development, and ensuring that whatever lenders and contractors get into has a consistent language, so that folks can know where they're getting what they're getting themselves into. It's quite important from your presentation. So I guess just to start us off, and we'll start with you, just to maybe address the issue of the access for a variety of constituencies across the globe. It is easier for academics and those who have jobs to access financing, perhaps to get a loan, a mortgage to buy a home or build a home. But it might not be for someone who is who is in the low income bracket, but also increasingly those who find themselves in the middle class, what we call middle class, to balance and to access financing. And just to tip it off as well, around the homeless, people who are struggling with just the basics of accessing a place to stay. How do we solve this deep question? Deb, thank you.
Yes, that is a deep question. I think what we're seeing more and more are companies that are looking to develop rental housing, and interestingly, small scale rental housing. So these are simple buildings that can be placed on small plots in center city neighborhoods where people are already living, so close to their existing families and schools and jobs, and maybe they cost $200,000 or $300,000 US to build, but they can be easily managed. The construction is simple and quick, and they can be offered at a very affordable price. And there is some interesting property technology management systems out there that allows a company to manage multiple buildings digitally, collect rents, and handle property management across multiple properties using these technology systems. So that increases the efficiency, but it allows people to live where they really want to live, instead of these mega projects out in the periphery. To me, that today is the most viable way to provide better housing now. For sale housing and mortgages for sale housing is a perennial problem in Africa. Aside from South Africa, we've seen so little progress in the area of mortgage finance. And it's interesting because I'm speaking at a conference here in Chicago, the National Association of Securities Professionals, and we have a full day focused on Africa. And what we're going to be talking about is ways to get institutional investors, both on the continent and in the US, involved in long-term funding, especially for mortgages. And this is a problem that we're working on both ends to solve, coming up with more creative financing sources for people at the rental spectrum, or maybe a rent-to-own kind of a program, but at the same time looking at a top-down, trying to mobilize more long-term funding from the institutional investors within Africa.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Deborah, for your answer. I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Prof. Kalema, and thank you so much to all the presenters. I have learned a lot. I'm from the University of KwaZulu-Natal and a Masters in Housing candidate, also a part of IPSA board. So I think that for us as young people, when we're trying to envision housing, we have understood that there are a lot of barriers to entry, but this doesn't just happen within the housing space. And so housing becomes a socioeconomic challenge at a larger scale. When we have a youth unemployment rate in South Africa that is at over 70%, I think that we then have to ask ourselves, where are all these young people living? And so we don't look at housing in isolation from mental health challenges. We don't look at housing challenges in isolation to issues of land and accessibility, but also rural to urban migration. Where are young people living? And so I do agree with Professor Gambo when he says that in his country, 99% of the young people are those that are living in informal settlements. And so we start seeing that housing access for the youth, or entry-level housing access for the youth, is either homelessness or informality. What then makes informality accessible to the youth? The youth is vibrant, the youth is forceful. So in terms of land invasions, we then see informality as a self-help mechanism that enables young people to get land within the country. But I think that the biggest challenge is that a lot of young people don't understand housing. And so again, I'm in agreement with Professor Gambo when he says that we need to enlarge broad-based housing education for young people so that when they do, in the event that they do, for example, in South Africa, invade or employ self-help mechanisms of accessing house, whether illegal or legal, they understand what a human settlement means beyond the structure. We've recently experienced floods in our country, and young people don't want to build. They're waiting for the government to come and intervene. Yes, this is, quite a controversial comment to make, but people coming from rural areas understand that self-help and youth activism and youth agency is the best way of affecting your own housing access. But you find that young people in the urban area believe that they need to be dependents, they feel entitled. And so increasing housing education and also changing the narrative of what the role of government is when it comes to giving young people access to housing needs to start changing. It starts with us as young people being a part of the advocacy, being a part of housing education. Because when a professional comes on board, the language, like one of the presenters have said, the language is far too complex, it's sophisticated. And again, it starts segregating and alienating those who are coming from rural areas, those who don't have housing education, those who are already living in informal settlements. And so also understanding how to simplify the housing language for those who have not gone through the schooling system, because these are the people that are in low paying jobs. These are the young people who don't even have access to all of the housing instruments that are available. So I think for me, then the debate becomes, do we try and specify, where should young people be living? Young people should be living in decent and adequate housing. And so trying to isolate the issue of access to youth housing becomes a bit of a danger, because we're going to, start, creating a deviation of what adequate housing would mean, because it's saying, no, but young people should build their own, and we start, There's just always a danger of trying to isolate the issue of youth housing, youth and housing, to the one of housing in South Africa. The issue of housing in South Africa is one that affects young people more than anyone. 35-year-olds are living at home with other 35-year-olds. And so there are a lot of challenges, but everything cuts back to the socio-economic challenges that our country is experiencing. And so when we look at it in isolation to the high youth unemployment rates, we are running in the danger of trying to solve housing issues that are in effect and in actual sense an economic issue in South Africa. And so, like Mr. Boyce has been saying, the histories in our diasporas affect access to youth and housing. And so also we're touching on youth in finance. When we're speaking about housing financial instruments, we're trying to give access to the youth, but I think it becomes far more important that we add these little things of saying, this is for the youth, by the way, this is for the youth, because it raises a green flag for young people to know that this is where we're trying to direct you. This is where affordability is found for young people. I'm not going to go into a lot of things, but again, I loved what Professor Joseph was discussing, which is urban agriculture. But I want us to actually emphasize rural agriculture. It is not something that poor people should be engaging in. Agriculture is life. If you've eaten today, you need to thank a farmer. This is something that we say when we're in the rural communities. If you've had a meal, thank a farmer, because everything starts from the soil. And so not running away from rural development will also assist us in addressing urban city development. Our rural areas have a lot more potential in solving city challenges than we might think. A lot of the young people there already know how to work the land. They know what it takes to build a house. But what we're not doing is giving them the socioeconomic infrastructure. And so when we are discussing housing issues, let us not run away from discussing what does it take to really solve the local economic development challenges, which is what Professor Joseph was discussing, that the most resilient communities are those that have a very strong local economy, which transcends or looks informal. So are we really saying that our rural communities or informal communities are informal? I think that we've made them some subsets of community, but in truth, when we're looking at the diasporas and developing countries, informality is formality for us because it's broad-based access, it is resilient, and it's self-help, and it gives young people access to economies and makes them business people without them saying, I'm unemployed. So sometimes changing our jargon as developers and as writers will assist us in actually finding and properly locating some of these solutions. Local economic development headed by the youth would actually solve far more housing challenges than we might think. So that would be it from me. Thank you to the presenters. I'm looking forward to getting some of the slides. It was so informative, and we're hoping to discuss offline. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Watu. We could have said it better. And I see there's more hands, and I would maybe like to give the opportunity to Professor Gambo just to respond to what you have said, and then I will get Luyanda. Luyanda, you had your hand up just to comment, and then we'll give the platform to Brandon. This is where we are engaging colleagues, and we can take it as far as we want. I know that the formal session ended at 1:30, but let's take it as much as we want, and let's discuss some of these issues as together. Go ahead, Prof. Gumbo, if you have any responses to what Watu was saying around youth, but also the languaging that we are using and the exclusionary kind of issues, the exclusionary language that we're using, and the dichotomies that we're creating as authors around the issue of language, around the issue of housing. So I think perhaps Professor Gombo is gone. Luanda, go ahead.
Thank you, Prof, for the opportunity. My name is Luanda Marcova. I'm a master's candidate in housing, and my reflection is around Mr. Joseph's presentation, where he indicated the conceptual framework for measuring resilience. And as a housing student, I believe this framework is also very crucial in the development of resilient human settlements. Not so long ago, I also attempted a model around making human settlements resilient. However, mine was more on responding to the recent floods that occurred in Durban. So since the theme of the room is housing finance, I believe this framework is crucial in ensuring a resilient human settlement when it comes to financing housing. As developing countries, we are faced with the issue of affordability and accessibility. So when it comes to housing, especially in the urban areas, so my take here will be that ensuring resilience in the context of housing finance is that it should be accessible in terms of easing the regulations of the finance institutions when it comes to housing, because now our urban areas are dominated by the urban poor, and they should also have access to these opportunities such as finance to build their houses. So in terms of affordability, rents and home loans payments should be set in a manner that even entry-level employees, like Watu was mentioning, be able to afford, simultaneously affording other things such as the transport, food, and healthcare. So measuring resilience with these two, which is accessibility and affordability, I believe will provide a more impactful response dealing with issues faced by the urban poor. And with inclusivity and sustainability, which are other aspects covered, it is more of looking housing beyond housing finance, because the issue of gender, race, ethnic groups also comes into play in terms of measuring whether accessibility and affordability is equally distributed in our societies. So, and sustainability, ensuring that our future generation are able to benefit from the strategies around affordability and accessibility. So my reflection on this framework is that it should be taken into consideration not only on policy implementation level, usually in local levels, but also in policy formulation, in policy and legislation formulations. Thank you, that's my reflection.
Thank you so much, Luyanda. Go ahead, Mr. Brandon.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. It's not Brendan, it's Jan Tladi. I am with Brendan. I was particularly interested in Brendan's presentation, and thanks for the interesting presentation by all speakers. It was heartwarming to hear of a land restoration program which has some socioeconomic impact, like the Zanzibar one that Mr. Brandon talked about, the case study. I wanted to ask him particularly a question around whether, you know, the study also dealt with other forms of land restitution, like where communities opt for compensation. You know, if not, maybe it might be interesting to have a comparative study in terms of the different forms of land restitution. But all in all, all the presentations were quite eye-opening. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question, Mr. Tladi. Go ahead, Brandon. He's next to you.
Greetings again, colleagues, and thank you to the co-presenters for excellent and really insightful presentations. It was a learning curve. Colleagues, various commentators have been very critical of the fact that South Africa's urban restitution program has been mostly, by and large, I would say 95% of it has been through what has been quite derogatorily mentioned as checkbook restitution, where you find that people in the urban environments have opted, for whatever reason, to accept cash payouts in lieu of restoration or in lieu of alternative land. And not much research has been delved into in relation to this. Obviously, the passage of time has meant that families have grown. So where there was one household, that household is now probably 6 or 8 households. And so the constraints of enjoying the fruits, it's more expedient. It has been more expedient for some of the communities to opt for financial compensation. Of course, there are also examples where right here in Cato Manor in Durban, in fact, that was the subject of my master's degree thesis, where I considered the issue of a comparative study of the Kipi land claim and the Cato Manor land claim, both of which were settled through alternative land and housing projects, quite successful projects, but also of a limited scale. I think Kipi was under 200, and the Cato Manor one, where there were a large number of claimants, only 200 opted for housing as a form of restitution. So definitely it's an area for further research, and thank you for the question, Advocate. I hope I've tried to shed some light on that.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Colleagues, we have one of our colleagues who just joined us, and he was to present a paper on the assessment of the physical development at the internally displaced person camps in the Federal Territory in Nigeria. Professor Idu, Prof, will give you some moments just to reflect. I'm sure you have listened in as you joined us to the conversations, particularly the case study that Brendan and colleagues presented. And I'm sure there are similarities with the case that you were to present. So we'll give you some time just to reflect on what you were to present, just key points to give you that opportunity as well, since you have joined us. Go ahead, Prof.
Thank you very much. My name is Idowu Olusegun Oweye. I'm presenting this paper, Assessment of Physical Development at the IDP camps in the Federal Capital of Nigeria. When we look at IDP, the internally displaced person, the case about them have attracted the global interest, owing to the fact that the level of its occurrence and the direct impact on everyone in Nigeria, affecting the socio-economic characteristics, the political, the economic situation has been alarming. And across the world, in recent time, over 40 million people have been forced to leave their place of residence due to natural disaster or clashes. I know Nigeria has been on the news most of the time on this issue. And when we look at the report of the World Bank in 2014, in the Sahel region of Africa, over 1.1 million persons are compulsorily displaced because of conflict. The plight about the displaced person, most especially in Nigeria, had remained a serious concern to the government and as well to international community. In the course of proliferation of IDP camps across Nigeria, also has been a major concern. And when we look at it, this has been due to the failure of the successive government in the provision of good governance and also equity in the management of the nation's resources. When we look at the content of what this paper is all about, the incidence of IDP, most especially in the FCT, the Federal Capital Territory of Nigeria, the seat of the government of the country, has been on the increase. As the population of this IDP increase on a daily basis, people are coming in, as you saw, some people are going out. And this one has affected most of the infrastructure, not within the IDP itself, but outside the IDP. The places, most of the problems are now coming in some area that as a result of the IDP in that neighborhood. Provision of shelter with other auxiliary services for the IDP camp in the FCT had remained a major problem. Governments have not been responsible in taking up the challenge, in taking the care of all this. The non-government organizations are trying their best, however, but it could not meet the needs of the people that are residing in the IDP. The issue of poor planning, insecurity, corruption, and lies have contributed significantly to the plight of IDP, which is on a daily basis. And on this note, this study has been conducted to examine the kind of physical development that are present in the IDP camps in the FCT, with the view to look at what has become their life and the well-being and also the sanitation. Within the Abuja territory, Federal Capital Territory, 2 IDP camps have been selected for this work. And one is at Kushingoro area and the other one, Durumi camp. In this study, household, in collecting the information, the household head at the IDP camp has been shortlisted using scientific method, statistical method to get those people that will give us reliable information about their plight and condition of their living in that camp. In these two camps, about 331 households were selected for the work. And with these 331, we're able to use random sampling techniques in selecting them. The analysis was carried out using descriptive statistical approach. And considering all this in this work, Kushigoro area, which is one of the IDP camps, have been known to have about 37% of the total IDP, the 62% of the total IDP, while the other one at Durumi camp has only 37% of IDP that we have within that area. This one is telling us that the displacement of people from Kushingoro, they are more in number because one, it is the environment and the little facilities that are available within this camp. And when we consider the age of all those people, the group of people that are living in the IDP, the result shows that most of them are within the age of 47 years and below. 47 years and below, the youthful age of people that's supposed to be useful to this country are residing in IDP. Doing what? Doing nothing. Waiting for the government, waiting for international organization or any other NGO to come to their rescue. And also, when we look at it, both the two camps, the IDP, the female are more in numbers. They are more in number, experiencing suffering compared to any other places number. And in this study, when we consider the physical development of IDP, this IDP camp, it is really shown that from this result, that 28% of the IDP, there's no any building where they put their head. They have used either nylon, polythene bags, they have used any other materials to use as a shelter, which is not good. And the weather where we are, consider some other ailment that can come as a result of that. This one shows that the materials used as a shelter for the IDP in Abuja is nothing to write home about. But we can also consider the environmental condition of the IDP. Looking at the environmental condition, I was able to look at the waste collection and disposal practice, the method of waste disposal, the toilet facility, sanitation practice, and also the visitation of the so-called sanitation officers in monitoring the environmental condition. The result has shown that the private organization has been the one responsible for waste collection. The government agency and the have not been standing up to their responsibility in terms of sanitation for all those things in that area. And also, when looking at the method of waste collection in that area, is open dumping refuse that we have that is, and this one is telling us that is could develop into the sanitation in terms of the cleaning of the environment. The people and the family individually that have been doing that, there's no problem with this. Even if they are living in their community, they have to clean their environment. The government still have their responsibility in this area. And later, in the area of sanitation officers, the sanitation officers are just as if none is within the Federal Capital Territory to oversee the condition and the plight of the IDP when it comes to sanitation, sanitation in the camp. And this one is a very serious concern. Looking at all this, the result have established that there is no presence of adequate physical planning infrastructure in terms of shelter within the camp. and is a problem that the nation and the government of this country should stand up to solve. And also, there's the issue of poor sanitation in the IDP camp and the resulting effect of health challenges of the people in that area is another problem. And looking at the way the toilet facility, there has been open defecation within the IDP camps. You see people openly, they will stay somewhere within their house, take their bath before daybreak, and all these ones have an effect that will bring back to the environment. And all this, government needs to stand up to their responsibility. Government should adopt proactive planning approach to IDP management. We cannot leave this to chances. We cannot leave it that God will come and help them. It's government responsibility. They have to stand up. Also, the adoption of sustainable fiscal planning principles, they are required in the management of this. Their space needs to be planned. Not that you need to put down magnificent buildings for them, but there are things that you can do that will still alleviate the problem and their suffering. And lastly, a reliable partnership strategy is required. Improving the condition of the IDP, and also within their sanitation, refuse collection, and other things that will benefit their existence in that. And this is all I have. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Prof, for giving us the food of thought. And I think there are synergies between what you have shared with us. And as a sociologist who is heavily involved in demography and community development, what is common from presentations that I've heard today is the issue of how do we address the issue of the youth bulge. It's in demographic space, the increasing number of young people in our communities who are looking for solutions, but then there are no opportunities for them to channel that activism and that knowledge that they have based on their own experiences to build their future. It is a reality on the continent. The continent of Africa is the most youthful continent you can ever find. And if we don't really address this issue for the youth, it's going to really, really challenge us in the future. And it is challenging us now. One other thread that I've identified in the presentations is the outcry for redressing and re-articulating and rethinking of what the past has, what we have gained or inherited from the past, and a need for collaboration in moving us forward in a multidisciplinary manner. Collaboration is indeed important from all sectors to make sure that we address some of these very complex issues around housing access. And of course, the challenges are never ending. Access to clean water, food security, sanitation and ablution resources. But then it brings me to say, I mean, housing is a human right. We all must have shelter. And I think for us, it's a challenge on how in multidisciplinary teams we are going to solve this very, very complex issue. It's a call for planners. It is a call for housing specialists. It's a call for community engagers. It's a call for all of us to come up with solutions. And I know that time is not on our side, but I asked Watu just to give us a summary or even a way forward to say, this is what I think we should do. from a young person, then we can close the session. But my hope is that the conversations will continue. The conversations will continue, and I'm asking the organizers for us, particularly this group who have been engaging, for us to engage somehow. I don't know how we're going to do it, but I'm sure someone in the technical space can let us know so that we can keep this conversation going. We have very, very important guests who have shared the platform with us, who have shared knowledge and expertise based on their own experiences. And we would like to thank them all. I would like to thank all the presenters and all the colleagues who asked the questions and who contributed their thoughts on this subject matter of housing finance. Indeed, we are the solution to some of these problems, as an earlier speaker spoke in the opening session. So Watu, I'm putting you on the spot. What must we do? I know it's too heavy on your shoulders, but what must we do? You had your hand up, and I thought this would be a good place for you to just inspire us so that we can move ahead in addressing some of the issues that were presented today. Over to you. Thank you, colleagues. Watu, are you there? Okay, colleagues, I don't see Watu, but I will open it up to anyone from the panel. Brandon, Deborah, Luyanda, anyone who would like to take a stab at this challenge for us.
Thank you, Prof. Mine is just to complement the speakers, and I've also sent some questions to them individually. To Deborah, what a wonderful presentation, Deborah, and interesting ideas. You mentioned the idea of a one-stop shop, kind of consolidating the support to developers. Do you think that this could be a 3P, as you call it, arrangement, and how could it work? And given that you also have some insight into South Africa, do you think that that could work in our context as well?
I think it's an interesting idea. I wouldn't want to go so far as to speculate about whether it would work specifically in South Africa. I think some of that is being done already, but in terms of coordinating sources, that I don't think has been done anywhere, sources of financing for developers of the projects. So I think that's an interesting opportunity, and I'm frankly kind of thinking like, how can we do this? I don't think it's something that DFC could do, but I'd like to talk to some people to see if there's a way of putting something like that together. On the P3 side, the only and of course, to do that, you have to figure out, well, how do you pay for it, or any of these things? Who pays for it? And so can you get grant money to pay for activities that involve developers, which is fundamentally a commercial enterprise, that may be more difficult than getting grant money to support activities around what Kulia was talking about, youth-oriented housing programs and outreach and efforts to figure out what their needs are and how can you make sure that you provide housing that meets their needs. I think that's an area where you might be able to get some kind of, philanthropic funding for that. On the P3 side, I have seen some countries try to create this kind of one-stop shop within like the housing ministry or like a foreign investment group or in the commerce area or something like that, with mixed results because they really aren't housing focused. They're more generic. And I think what the housing and its specific complexities and needs its own area of focus. So I don't know in a P3 arrangement what you definitely need the government to participate, but I think you need the private sector perspective in order to understand the needs of the developer and represent those needs with all of the various government agencies. So you need to set it up in such a way that that entity has full credibility and authority given to it to negotiate between the different entities within the government. Some funding, some office support, secretariat support would be important. Could you have the government sign a contract with a private entity to run it? I rather like that idea because I think it's more likely to be sustainable that way. Whether you could get the various ministries and agencies to agree on how that would operate and how they would work together in a board arrangement or something like that in order to, make sure that all of the public requirements are being met might be a challenge. I would think, though, South Africa would be a good place to start because there's already a very strong focus on housing in South Africa. There are existing programs, there are agencies that are focused on housing. So in that respect, yes, I think it would be a good place to start. Just kind of brainstorming here, right?
Then again, Prof. Kalema, through you, I also wanted to ask a question to Professor Joseph, who also did a wonderful presentation about his thoughts on how possibly we can strengthen institutional resilience as one of his metrics. I want you to just understand his thoughts around that, and perhaps how do we create systemic resilience across all three of the I think it's 6 of the metrics that he proposed. Thank you.
I think Prof has left the session or might have been timed out of the session. Mr. B, I'm proposing a way forward from here on.
Proceed.
maybe the first one would be to appreciate all of the contributions that have been made. We've seen that a few of the speakers have been exiting and entering the room. So firstly, to appreciate everyone who has been with us throughout the duration of this plenary, and appreciate all of the contributions that have been made, because it goes without saying that they have been not just a talk show, but it has given us a clear depiction that the people who are within the city development space have the people at heart. So thank you for the contributions you're making on the ground. And then it would be to say, it becomes very important that everything that has been discussed becomes readily available to anyone else who has not been able to join this plenary. And so there is a YouTube platform where we will be flighting this. It is already available on YouTube, but the information will be circulated today and tomorrow. So if any of our stakeholders were not able to join us from the initial stages of the discussion, you will be able to go onto the YouTube platform and access everything that has been presented. I think the second one would be to say that the presentations will also be available through you, Mr. Popola, be available to anyone who still wants to access and engage further. The details of the people that have been in this plenary will be found on YouTube. The presenters are on the program. So let's not just have these conversations online, but let's take them offline and see where we collaborate. Let's see where we include young people in these conversations, because it becomes very important that we're not just building city for young people, but building it with them, so that they can also be accountable to the cities that they're living in. That was from my side. Prof. Kalema just asked me to give a way forward in terms of where to from here. So tomorrow we will be assembling again virtually, and those who are at UKZN can join us in Shepstone 5 as we have gathered again today. We'll start at 9. So all the links again will be circulated through the pages. The links will be available for anyone to join the relevant plenary that they intend on joining. And I think that's it from my side in terms of just trying to wrap up this session. I know that we still want to engage further, but we're also trying not to lose everyone who is engaged on this platform, because we've been engaging for a while now. But I'm not sure if anyone else would like, I see Promise Lamini has raised her hand. I'd like to open that up to her while we lead towards the closure of the session. Thank you. You can just unmute yourself.
Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Promise Lamini, the Acting School Operations Manager at the School of Built Environment and Development Studies. I just want to take this opportunity to thank all the presenters, because to me, well, it's the first time I'm attending the symposium, and all the presentations were very informative and also a learning curve, especially on the Zanzibar land claim study, which was talking about the local areas that I'm very familiar with, but had no clue about the study. So thank you very much to everyone, and we hope you enjoy your stay at UKZN. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And thank you for being an amazing host. For us who are on site at UKZN, we can attest to just your hospitality and how well organized this has been. Thank you to Mr. Popula in partnership with Samuel, who's not in this specific plenary. But again, we thank everyone who has written. We know the amount of work years that it takes to just put together the work that you're doing. But thank you for being people of impact. And let's meet again tomorrow and see where our conversations take us. And also let's think around areas of collaboration moving forward, because this is the US-Africa collaborative. So we want to see where we're collaborating. We want to see areas where we join ventures, communities that we still want to go and visit. So if you have ideas in mind, keep them, note them down, so that when we do again gather, we have a way forward. We have resolutions that we've taken based on the papers that have been presented, based on the contributions and the reflections that have come out of this plenary. And that's it from me. It's Watson Tuli. Thank you very much, and safe travels, or enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and let's meet tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. What a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, and bye everyone. Let's enjoy the lunch now.